They bet I'd cry when they handed me divorce papers at Christmas. It was Brandon, grinning, the kind of grin that never reached his eyes, and Nate, who brought the kind of laugh that filled a room so you didn't hear anything else. His mother sat between them, hands folded as if she were waiting for a performance. I was in the hallway, the draft from the open door making the edges of my maroon sweater lift against my skin. Through the thin wall I could hear plates clinking, a laugh too loud, the scrape of a chair. I paused with my hand on the banister and listened as if the house itself were trying to tell me something. "Bet she cries," Nate said. "I give her 20 minutes. "You always were dramatic," Brandon said, bright and easy. His voice had that practiced, casual cruelty he used in public, the sarcasm wrapped in charming concession. "It'll be perfect." She signs, she cries, we move on. Mrs. Hale, my mother-in-law, smiled in a way that suggested she already knew the ending. "We'll make a lovely show," she said. There was a clink of ice in a glass. They spoke as if they were choosing decorations. I stayed where I was. The hallway smelled like pine and cinnamon from the kitchen, a false cheeriness that felt almost obscene. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. I listened to them set the scene for my humiliation the way an audience might listen for a conductor's downbeat before the orchestra begins. I let them have that confidence. Calm made better camouflage than indignation. The first time he belittled me in front of other people, I laughed because it seemed easier than explaining. He made a joke about my career during brunch with his friends. "She thinks spreadsheets are romantic," he said, and everyone chuckled. I laughed louder than the rest because it's a strange economy. You pay social currency to appear graceless and avoid other costs. Later, when it was just the two of us, his tone would soften and become a schooling. "You know you can't actually take time off right now, right? Who would manage everything?" It was never presented as a demand. It was offered as a care package, a concern. "For your own good," he would say. Those were the knives, small, precise, disguised in sweetness, blades dipped in honey. They cut 1,000 tiny ways. Over months, I stopped posting photos where my hair looked undone. I deleted an event I'd been excited about because he said it felt like too much. I stopped fighting the comments he made in passing at family dinners. "You're too sensitive, you're oversharing, you don't need to worry about that." Because arguing took energy, and energy was something I needed to hold in reserve for mornings alone at my desk when the house felt big and empty. People often ask whether you notice a pattern right away. You do, in the way you notice rain that gradually changes from mist to downpour. The first time someone says it's nothing and hands you a paper towel, you accept it.
The sixth time, you check your reflection because you want to see if any tears are on your face, and you realize you're holding the paper towel with both hands. There was an evening with a napkin. It sounds almost silly to look back on. Napkins are trivial. But that napkin spoke a language we were both fluent in. It happened at a rooftop party, the kind where the city hangs neon and the wind smells like distant rain. Brandon had 2 drinks ahead of me and a joke ready that he'd told before, tailored for an audience that loved his clever cruelty. He unfolded a cocktail napkin, held it out, and said, "Sign here, sweetheart, for old time's sake. Let's see if your signature is still the same." Everyone laughed. I laughed too, because laughing is easier than answering why it hurt. He put a flourish as if he were offering me a keepsake. He pinched the napkin between 2 fingers and tossed it on the table like a prop. I kept my hands in my lap. Later, when the music softened and the lights came down, I folded the napkin into my pocket the way you might fold a small, dangerous thing into a handkerchief, quietly, unconsciously, because the act felt like reclaiming a corner of myself. That napkin sat on my dresser for a week, then in a drawer, then in a small file box I kept for receipts and letters I meant to never throw away. I did something with it that felt like a private rebellion. I took it seriously. I won't tell you the mechanics or the legalese. I won't give instructions. I will tell you this. I treated that napkin as if words mattered, as if an offhanded gesture could be a document if observed and remembered. I made copies, I tucked notes with dates, and I told a friend, Jenny, who is the kind of person who reads contracts for dessert and does the heavy lifting when everyone else is too polite to notice. Jenny was what I would call a rarity, outspoken, fiercely practical, and oddly tender. We'd been friends since college, when we both believed in doing things loudly and badly and with conviction. Somewhere along the way, I learned to bury conviction under caution. Jenny never let me do that without a fight. When I told her about the napkin, she did not laugh. She took one look and asked the questions I had been pretending not to have. "You're not going to let that be a joke, are you?" she asked. "I don't want a scene," I said. The truth was smaller and larger than that. I did not want to be the protagonist in a scene staged by other people for their entertainment. I wanted options. "So let's make sure the joke can't be used as a script," she said, casually fatalistic, like someone arranging flowers for a wake. Not because you're planning anything dramatic, because you deserve to know where you stand. We met for coffee at a table in an almost empty cafe where a jazz record hummed on the speaker. Jenny's hands moved as she spoke. She made little diagrams in the foam of her latte. She suggested small, prudent things, and I listened.
The word prudent felt like a relief after months of being told what was dramatic and what was not. She said things that didn't promise miracles, but they gave me a map. I began to collect. The word makes me think of rooms with shelves and soft light. It felt domestic and defiant at once. Receipts, ordinary slips of paper that mapped out where we had been, what had been bought, when. Screenshots of messages that were sent and then deleted, like a person erasing footnotes from a biography. Notes to myself, dates, times, ephemeral things I've learned to remember. Photos taken for no reason other than to prove a moment existed. People ask if this process feels invasive. It didn't feel invasive to me. It felt like taking a photograph of a bruise before it healed. It felt like honoring truth. I learned how to be meticulous without becoming consumed. I labeled things with simple words: kitchen, April, party, July, text to Jason, Oct. I kept physical copies in a small metal box with a latch, and digital copies in a place only I could access. Jenny showed me how to organize names so that the pattern read like a sentence, not a scatterplot. It was work. It saved me from feeling like I was losing time to the fog of being made to doubt myself. There were other things I started to do that felt like rehearsals for a future in which I would be steadier. I wrote down my truths. Not the messy, exclamatory kind of truth you shout into pillows, but precise sentences that I could read on bad days. You are not fragile because you cry, I wrote once. You are not petty because you protect yourself. Some mornings I stood with a mug of tea and read those sentences out loud like a prayer. At home, I honed the performance. Not because I wanted to deceive, but because he had learned to believe his own narrative, and it was useful to let him feel in control while I gathered the things that would keep me free. There is a power to appearing perfect when you are anything but. It lowers people's guard. It lets you keep your options open while they write the script for you. I became the perfect hostess because it was safer. Warm bread, a song on the record player, candles trimmed to the same height. I timed the rolls to come out of the oven in a way that made his mother compliment me in front of everyone. You always were so good with the table, she would say, and I would smile and tuck another knife into its place. I learned to laugh at jokes that were sharp. I learned to answer with a line that turned their barbs into something smaller, less lethal. You're right, I would say sometimes, and in the same breath, I don't mind. It calmed them. It calmed me. It allowed me to move in silence. The house became a theater. I lit candles to erase what felt raw. I placed a pie on the counter and dusted sugar on top like a brim for a mask. I polished silver so there would be a reflection of civility, even if it was just for a night.
People came over and left saying, "What a lovely home," and I took their praise like an act of camouflage. There were small betrayals that seemed to come from nowhere. Once, at a family lunch, Brandon scoffed at one of my friends as if she'd said something foolish. The friend's face tightened, and she left early. Later, Brandon said under his breath, as if apologizing, "You know how they are." I wanted to tell my friend that I saw it differently, but by then the moment had folded into the fabric of the day, and telling the truth would have felt theatrical. The truth is not always a dramatic entrance. Sometimes it's a quiet returning of light to a window. I had a planner, cheap, cloth-covered, and I began to mark small things in it with a sharp, fine-point pen. Dates where I would see Jenny. Dates where I would call in a favor. Nothing illegal, nothing cinematic. I made appointments with a woman who had once been in the same position as me and now ran a counseling group for women rebuilding lives. I booked checkups. I learned to keep my passport renewed because it felt like bureaucracy, but also like sovereignty. Jenny did more formal things in her own way. She drafted an addendum, not as a threat, but as documentation. She had a way of taking words and giving them a weight that made people pay attention. She said, "It's not about punishing anyone. It's about making sure there's clarity." Her voice had that professional softness that makes complicated things sound simple. I trusted her because she didn't try to prescribe drama. She mapped out options. We met at her apartment one rain-soaked evening. She made tea and placed a stack of paper on the table like a sort of armor. "I'm not promising anything," she said, eyes on me, steady. "But what I can promise is that you'll know where you are standing. That matters." I remember the sound of the kettle, a small domestic punctuation to a plan that kept getting bigger in my head. Every time I filed a thing away, I felt less like someone floating in a loud room and more like someone with a map. The map didn't guarantee a destination, it simply made the terrain legible. There were other small acts of preparation that looked to the outside world like ordinary life. I learned to keep 2 sets of keys in a drawer I had designated as emergency. I saved receipts for things I might need to prove it happened. I printed copies of emails and put them into a folder that smelled faintly of the ink and the paper and the kind of domesticity that feels secure. Each small ritual rebuilt a corner of my dignity. At the same time I had to live with him, I had to rehearse being the person he would applaud in public. It required an actor's discipline. I took dinners when I had no appetite because it made his friends comment on how well we entertained. I swallowed 1,000 softened jibes at family gatherings and kept my chin up.
And while I did this, I simultaneously labeled my files in a corner of the house where no one went, an unnoticed drawer in what everyone called my perfect kitchen. People will tell you there is a moral calculus to these decisions. They will ask whether you were cold or calculating. I will tell you this. There is a difference between being vengeful and being prudent. Revenge wants nothing to be left standing. Prudence preserves options. There is a dignity in keeping your own life intact, even if you must act as if you are content while you do it. We moved through a winter where every social moment seemed like a test. His mother would compliment the way I served scones, and then later say something like, "You're too sensitive. Don't make everything a crisis." It was as if being praised gave her license to be cruel. I learned to accept compliments in public and catalog the barbs in private. I kept a soft voice and an internal ledger. There were friends who drifted away, quietly, in the way friends do when a subtle pressure has been applied to a group, and there is a ripple you don't see at first. There were others who didn't. Beth, my sister, was a constant like a stone in a river. She came over in the late afternoons, bringing a bowl of something with garlic and coarse salt, and she sat on the counter and asked me about silly things that had nothing to do with strategy. "Did you finally try that recipe?" she'd ask. Or, "Have you read that book?" She noticed my small triumphs, an oven that finally yielded perfect bread, a scarf I tied in a new knot, and treated them like landmarks. In a house that was increasingly theatrical, her presence felt like a foothold. You learn to compartmentalize when you need to survive. Performance during the day, preparation at night. The creativity was almost entertaining. The way I arranged flowers so their stems made a quiet, disciplined architecture. The way I placed a tray of tea so the steam would soften the edges of a sentence Brandon might make. If he was going to be theatrical, I would learn the set design. The rumor about the divorce papers started as a throwaway comment at a party with friends. Nate said something loud enough for me to hear because he wanted me to applaud the joke. "You should really give her those papers," he said, smiling like a man who was handing out instructions to an audience. "Make it public. Make it on a holiday. Let's see if she crumbles." It was a bet dressed in holiday cheer. They imagined a scene of me, emotional, exposed, unable to hold a glass without spilling, while they sat with their wine and counted minutes. It was such an old performance, the male delight in public drama directed at a woman. It hardly surprised me. It surprised other people, though, those who asked me later if I had ever expected it, if I had known they were capable of planning humiliation like a party trick. I knew. I had seen the arc before, but hearing it aloud changes the tone.
Hearing one's humiliation arranged like a dinner course makes you understand intentions. So I stayed in the hallway until I could see the faces in the dining room in the glow from the chandelier. I watched him puff his chest when Mrs. Hale said something approving. I watched Nate's hand rest on his knee like a man who liked the idea of bets because it made the world a little sportier. I pressed my fingers to the railing until the knuckles blanched and felt nothing like panic, more like a slow, steady readiness. "Oh, Steph," Mrs. Hale said at one point, not looking at me, her voice a ribbon of affection. "We just thought it would be best to clear the air properly." As if an event needs clearing, as if your private life were a room you could sweep in front of guests. I straightened my sweater, maroon, a color I favored when I wanted to look both warm and in command. I smoothed a stray ribbon in my hair and drew my face into the smile I had practiced in mirrors, a smile that did the work of politeness and kept its secrets. I found my breath and let it steady me. There is a certain kind of arithmetic to waiting. Minutes add up like beads on a chain. I could hear the laughter grow louder. Someone proposed a toast. I thought about stepping into the room and stopping the show in its tracks, but that would have required a different kind of spectacle. Tears, a scene, a collapse that would have left me with everyone else's narrative. I had a different plan. Before I left the hallway, I took one last measure, not of the door, not of the chandelier,
but of myself. The house seemed wide as a stage, and I had been cast as an actor in someone else's script for too many acts. I had rehearsed the role he wanted me to play, gracious, apologetic, small, and I had perfected it, because sometimes survival means being the actor the room expects, while you quietly write your own ending. The early months of preparation had taught me to keep my hands busy. I warmed a small tea in the microwave, the way housewives in seat of their pants sitcoms do when they have 40 seconds left to save dinner. The steam fogged up the window for a moment. I thought of the napkin and the little metal box with its latch, objects that felt less like proof and more like a promise to myself. They were not threats, they were anchors. When they opened the dining room door, the light hit me like a stage light. Voices turned. There was that odd delay between an entrance and the audience placing you where they want you to stand. Someone called out, "There she is," as if I was the finale. Nate winked at Brandon, the kind of wink that is shorthand for "we're about to be entertained." I set the tray down on the buffet and smiled in a way that made them lean into their roles. The roll of the party moved forward with pleasant inevitability. Small talk, compliments, a clink of glasses. Everything was in its place.
The meal would be carved, plates passed, small talk about weather and travel and the new year stacked like plates in a dishwasher, easily moved, easily dismissed. Only I was not the same person who had walked into the marriage 2 years before. Something in me had hardened, like a glaze over the soft center of an unsaid resolve. I had stopped shrinking to make others comfortable. I had learned to save words like coins for a rainy day. I had found a friend in the rhythm of careful preparation. At some point during the main course, Brandon nudged the envelope closer to him. It lay on the sideboard, inconspicuous, brown, corporate-looking, the way men like to frame their seriousness in neutral colors. I watched it without meaning to. Its presence felt like a prop placed on a stage for a scene the writer had rehearsed. People continued to laugh and pass the gravy and remark on the turkey's crispness. I sipped my wine and let the conversation roll off me like water on wax. Underneath it all was another life quietly being built. Documents filed in a counsel's office, copies sent to trusted hands, dates noted, everything in order enough that the uncertainty of a single moment couldn't fold me into shards. I held that private work like a small light in my palm. Sometimes people talk about courage as if it's a sudden flare, but for me it had been a series of small, steady choices: to name the hurt to a friend, to keep a receipt, to not answer when provoked, to call someone who knew how to help and ask for a plan that didn't include spectacle. Those choices stitched themselves into a cloak that fit better than I expected. When the conversation lulled and someone reached for another plate, Brandon's hand brushed mine in a way that felt like a question. His eyes were bright with the certainty of a man who thinks he holds the script. He didn't know I had been writing margins into that script for months. He smiled at me, easy, practiced, and said loud enough for Nate and his mother to hear, "Let's make this interesting, shall we?" I did not answer immediately. My silence was a metronome. I smiled and reached for the cranberry sauce with a steady hand, like a puppeteer guiding a trivial scene. All afternoon, I had practiced the small gestures that make you appear amenable. They had chosen their hour. I had chosen my reserve. After dessert, before the coffee had a chance to cool, I slipped into the kitchen to wash my plate. The clack of china was ordinary and comforting. I ran hot water and let the steam rise between my shoulder blades. I thought of the things I had placed in order, the files with their precise labels, the copy of a napkin folded into a paper that smelled like night. I thought of Jenny's voice, practical and warm in my ear, and Beth's laugh, which felt like a bell. Someone knocked on the kitchen door, the small wooden door that opens to the back stoop. I moved to answer it, and as I did, Nate and Brandon passed each other in the doorway with the kind of hurried, conspiratorial glance that signaled something was about to occur. Their laughter was too loud for the kitchen, for the dim light, for the soft hum of the refrigerator. "Ready for the show?" Nate mouthed, as if we were actors in a play whose script I hadn't signed. I fixed my face into the patient expression I wore when I wanted a thing to seem inevitable. "Yes," I mouthed back, because it felt better to speak and to be misunderstood, to say nothing and be misread. The kitchen smelled like oranges and rosemary. The house hummed like some great patient animal. I dried my hands and tucked a stray curl behind my ear. There was a drawer beneath the counter where I kept things that looked like everyday items, but had for me a different value. A small paperweight for my grandmother, a stack of postcards, a pen that wrote like a fountain.
I closed it and held my palm over it for a long moment, as if feeling for the heat of an ember. I did not rush back into the dining room. The show could wait. I had been told to expect a scene. I had prepared to meet it. There were things I had arranged that made the script less dangerous. There were people who knew the truth in quiet ways. I would not make a spectacle. I would present a gift. Before I went back in, I sent a text to Jenny that said only, "All as planned." She replied with 3 words that felt like combat armor. "I'm breathing too." I put my phone away and smoothed the front of my dress. The movement was ritual, a small ceremony of self-possession. I took a breath that felt better than a prayer. The room waited. The people in it were comfortable in their roles. They probably thought they were in control. When I walked back into the dining room carrying a tray of petit fours, someone clapped in a casual way, as if to encourage the entertainment. I set the tray down and let the room do what rooms do: circulate, laugh, forget. But I had a foil in my pocket, a small folded thing that was not a performance and not a prop. It was a piece of paper I had taken seriously. This is where the map of my life began to take a sharper outline. Months of collecting, of watching, of studying. There is a kind of quiet joy in shaping a life that is yours, even if the world assumes it belongs to someone else. I had learned to make space for small pleasures: a perfect pie crust, a scarf that felt like an armor I could button closed, the late-night call with Beth where we traded recipes and gossip until we both laughed. The bet sat like a stone on the tablecloth, unseen by some, obvious to those who had placed it. They thought they were writing the punchline to my story. They had rehearsed it with the smugness of men who have never had to consider the reverse, that someone else might be scripting their next move.
When the plates were cleared and the piano in the corner, gifted by a neighbor, played a tinkling, tentative version of a carol, I caught Brandon's eye across the room. He gave me that look again, the look of a man who expects confirmation. I walked over to where he stood, and because I had practiced hospitality, and because it was true, I kissed his cheek. It's funny the way a small gesture can be the most disarming thing. He straightened and smiled like a man who believes himself adored. His mother leaned in and said, "She's so composed, isn't she?" Nodding is a small thing. It's also a decision. I nodded, and in that small movement, I did not yield. I only placed the weight of my approval where I wanted it. They had bet on my tears. They had not accounted for the dignity of silence. That night, I did not go to bed early. I sat in my office with a lamp turned low and the small metal box in my lap. I opened it and looked at my notes, the rough edges of paper filed by date. Each piece of paper felt like a bead on a rosary. Each one reminded me of evenings spent building rather than breaking. The work had been private and precise. In the quiet, gratitude moved through me for the tiny, unspectacular things. A friend who showed up with a thermos, a sister who stayed on the couch until dawn, a lawyer who answered an email with a tone that made sense. You don't prepare for a reveal because you want to humiliate. You prepare because you refuse to be staged. You prepare because there is a life you still want to build on the other side. The alternative, relying on someone else's mercy, never appealed to me. I wanted a steadiness that could not be bargained with at a table with red candles and pie. The days that followed the party moved in steps. I checked my file, updated it, labeled the items with new adjectives that made patterns legible: pattern of undermining, public ridicule, claimed concern. Naming things doesn't always change them, but it makes you less alone in them. There is a consolation in taxonomy. It makes the fog feel like a field you can stand in and make sense of. Sometimes I would walk through the living room and see a napkin of sunlight fall across the coffee table, and it would remind me of how small things accumulate to make a life. I learned to stack my days so that the small joys were not swallowed by the larger anxiety. I lit candles in the evenings and read until the lines blurred. I made notes to myself: loving, dull, important. That anchored me. I practiced being kind to myself because there is no skill more useful than that. The bet simmered in the background like a rumor. They planned their timing with the kind of certainty you find in men who think tradition is an ally. Christmas, a family dinner, a public moment. Everything set for maximum spectacle. I kept my own schedule. I arranged meetings with attorneys with names I didn't yet know but trusted because they came with careful tones and practical questions. I told myself again and again that I was not preparing for revenge. I was preparing for dignity. There is a difference. One wants to cause harm.
The other wants to keep a life intact. The more they pushed for a show, the quieter I became. Quiet is not the same as passive. Quiet can be the room where plans are made. Quiet can be a steady hand on a small, inconvenient map. I kept my mouth soft and my files orderly. On the eve of the holidays, when the house smelt like pine and there were lights blinking gently across the mantel, I packed a small bag with things a woman keeps near when she is about to step into uncertain terrain. A pair of comfortable shoes, a scarf that would not show a tear if one came, my planner with the sharp black ink that made dates look final. I had learned to protect my heart with details, folders, contacts, names written down. They were not dramatic, they were practical. They gave me the ability to walk into a room knowing I had something resembling control. On Christmas morning, I warmed a single cinnamon roll in the oven and sat at the small table by the kitchen window and watched the light pour across the table. There is a solemnity to the routine of making breakfast when you know the day holds a kind of verdict. I sipped coffee and checked my phone. Jenny sent me a string of thumbs-up emojis. Beth texted, "Here whenever, you got this." I folded the napkin from my pocket, the napkin that had once been a joke and had quietly become a ledger of all the ways I had to prove that I existed. It was a small thing with frayed edges. There is a satisfaction in transforming a dismissive gesture into a reason for others to respect you. No one should have to catalog the things that protect them, but people do. We become archivists of our own lives because sometimes the world prefers stories that are simpler than ours. When guests began to arrive that afternoon, the house filled with warmth and the scent of rosemary and roast. Decorations were modest but tidy. The chair covers fit the seats. Plates gleamed like small satellites. My mouth practiced the polite shapes it would need. My thought practiced the steady cadence I would use when words were required. No sarcasm, no pleading, only clarity. They had planned their moment like a play. I had prepared mine like a quiet liturgy. There is a competence to being prepared that is both modest and formidable. I lit 3 candles on the mantel because the light felt like a physical thing you could hold against a dark thought. He and his mother and Nate had made their tiny wager. They were gambling with my shame. They had chosen a holiday because it tricks you into thinking warmth and cheer are universal. But warmth is not the same as mercy. As the house filled with chatter and laughter, I moved through the rooms like someone performing a well-rehearsed role because I had to.
There is a special kind of focus that comes with such rehearsals, the way you keep a coffee cup from overflow while your thoughts are elsewhere. The day demanded grace, so I gave it. At one point, in the flurry of serving salad, I paused by the mantel and looked at the little decorations, a sprig of holly, a candle, the family photograph. I thought about the years we had been told to dress our home like a postcard, to present our life in colors other people found comforting. I thought about the cost of that labor and the ways it had taught me to hide necessary things behind pretty things. There will come a time, I thought, where one does not need ornament to prove contentment. That day is far away and near. For now, I had a tray of cookies, a file in a locked drawer, and friends who were not afraid to stand close when needed. They were ready for a spectacle. I was ready to be discreetly, unarguably whole. I had been constructing that wholeness for months in small, unglamorous increments. The files, the calls, the quiet tests. It was not ugly work, and it was not heroic in the movie sense. It felt like a slow reclaiming. When the first plates were cleared and the coffee was poured, someone, Nate probably, pushed his chair back with a little flourish. The envelope sat on the sideboard like a prop that had been waiting for its cue. No one could have known whose hands would pick it up first. They had plotted a moment. My reaction would be their punchline. I folded my napkin into my pocket and eased into my place at the table, palms flat on my lap. The room was warm, and the light made everything softer. I gave the people at my table the smile that is useful in holiday gatherings, warm, practiced, slightly amused. They were arranging the bits of my life as if I were a story they were editing. That was their privilege. I had learned to make my own edits in private. When the conversation turned toward their joke, when someone nudged Brandon and he reached for the envelope with the premeditation of men choosing props, I felt the room tilt. People sipped their coffee, and the house held its breath without noticing. For the first time since I had put away the napkin in my file box, I felt the 2 shapes of my life collide. The performance that kept me safe in public, and the private scaffolding that kept me intact.
It was time to choose how to meet a moment they had arranged as entertainment. I had rehearsed this. I had prepared. I had a friend who would listen, a sister who would drive for any reason, and a set of documents that looked ordinary and felt like anchors. No one could know that the surest way I had found to keep my life intact was not to answer their questions with the theatrics they expected. I had learned that restraint is a kind of strategy. So I pushed back my chair slowly, smoothed my dress, and lifted my chin in a quiet, steady motion that said I was present and I was not afraid.
The envelope made its quiet journey across the sideboard toward Brandon's hands, like a small ship on its mocking course. He looked up and saw me watching him, and for a second, just a breath, the grin faltered. He thought he was certain. Certainty is a fragile thing when someone else refuses to take part in the spectacle. I moved as if to reach for a plate, then paused. I was not going to play the part they'd chosen. I was not going to perform my own diminishment. Instead, I set my hands on the table and met his eyes. The room was full of people who assumed their roles. The bet was a private wager dressed like holiday cheer. Time stretched thin as a ribbon before me. I felt the weight of months settle into a perfect, ordinary moment. It was, as these things often are, utterly simple. I rose, and the sound of my chair scraping the floor was like a small, steady drumbeat. The world around me hummed, a radio, a laugh, a child's squeal out on the stoop. I folded my hands once, like someone preparing to read something aloud, and stepped toward the sideboard where the envelope waited to perform its purpose. It was here, in that step, with the house and its lights and the people I'd once thought would protect me, that I understood the kind of courage I'd cultivated. Not a flame, but a good, steady lamp. Not thunderous vindication, but quiet completeness. I stepped closer to the sideboard, and for a heartbeat the room seems to narrow to the width of the envelope. It is ordinary, manila, beige, the kind of color men like when they want to look serious. Brandon reaches for it like a man knocking over a pawn. He looks triumphant, all the way to his hands. I brought the papers, he announces, loud and easy, like he's opening a present. Nate laughs. Mrs. Hale taps her napkin on her knee with delight. The table leans in. I pick up my wine glass as if I need it to steady my voice. I could refuse. I could stand here and say loud things and make their joke fail, because it would hurt them, but I don't want to play the scene they rehearsed. I have learned that silence can be a kind of pressure, a force that holds a room together while something different happens. Brandon slides the envelope toward me with a flourish, the movement theatrical enough to deserve applause. He does not notice the small gold-wrapped folder tucked like an unseen coin beneath my palm. He does not notice that the weight in my pocket is heavier than his prepared moment. I open the envelope, deliberately slow, and pull out the document they intended to weaponize, a sterile sheet with typed words and a signature line. It is the sort of thing meant to sound final, but to feel impersonal. There is a place to sign. The room expects tears or flinching, a catching of breath. I sign. It is nothing like the collapse they planned. My signature is a small, controlled thing. I let the pen rest for a second on the page, like a punctuation mark. Then I fold the paper and place it back into the envelope. Nobody applauds. A spoon clinks against a saucer. Nate's grin is the first thing to falter, just a twitch, almost imperceptible. Brandon's mouth tightens. He opens his mouth to speak and finds nothing he can say that will land like the salvo he'd prepared. The gold folder sits between Brandon's hands like a verdict he didn't see coming. Brandon tries to find humor again. What? You brought a sonogram for the dinner? His voice breaks midway through the sentence. The gunpowder of the joke is damp. He looks like a man whose rehearsed lines are scattering. People are shifting in their chairs. Mrs. Hale's smile thinning into concern, Nate staring down at his napkin as if it's become unreal. There is a small, private part of me that notices the details, the way the candlelight catches the silver, the little flecks of sugar on the tart, but mostly there is a steady steadiness inside me that comes from months of small, stubborn acts. Brandon tries to pull the evening back together by performing indignation. "This is a stunt," he says. "This is manipulative." "It's a record," I answer simply, "of choices." The room wants a drama where one person collapses and the other triumphs. They want to keep their bets because the world is simpler when people fit into neat roles. But the truth is rarely theatrical. It is ledgered, mailed, notarized in offices where no one looks for grandstanding. It is a stack of papers and a photograph and friends who did not flinch when asked to show up. Silence gathers, the heavy kind that arrives when words have been exhausted. Then the phone on the sideboard rings, abruptly loud. Brandon's hand flies to it. He doesn't notice, or maybe he notices and doesn't care, that the caller ID shows a firm he has never met. He answers it, and his expression tightens as he listens. His mouth opens and closes without sound. He covers the phone and looks at me with something that is not anger so much as bewilderment. "Your counsel is on line 3, he says, but the words are thin. I nod. I do not gloat. There is none of the theater of punishment in me. My satisfaction is precise and small, a thing like a closed fist of relief. I have not come here to destroy. I came here to be whole. Brandon stands then, abruptly, and the chair scrapes like a small drum roll. His mother reaches toward him and then stops, as if unsure which version of her son she is meant to support. He gathers his coat with clumsy motions. For an instant, the room watches him the way one watches an animal that doesn't know a door will not open the way it expects. "You'll rue this, Steph," he says, and the tone is supposed to carry menace, but it lands like a tired echo. He sweeps past the table, past the sonogram and the gold folder that had seemed a present and is now a record. He leaves with a small, indecent speed, like a man exiting a stage before the crowd has decided whether to applaud. Nate follows with a muttered apology that lands like a paper plane. Mrs. Hale stays behind for a moment, hands folded as if rehearsing the composition of the evening. She opens her mouth but closes it again. The chandelier light makes her face look softer and older.
There is a look between her and me that is not quite pity and not quite contrition. It feels like a gap. Beth stands up and crosses the room in 2 long strides. She hugs me, strong, immediate, then turns to Mrs. Hale and says nothing save a simple, measured, "Good evening." It is both a greeting and a claim. Jenny leans over and squeezes my shoulder. "Exactly as planned," she whispers, and it's not a boast so much as an exhale that means the wires are connected and the machine runs. Her eyes are bloodshot at the corner, like someone who stayed awake to mutter math into the night. The guests linger for a short while, murmuring. Some stay as if still expected to play their roles. Others slip away in awkward stages of apology. The house feels oddly like a theater where the actors are learning their new lines on the fly. When the front door finally closes, a kind of hush unspools through the rooms. The piano at the corner plays a soft, tentative chord. The candles burn on. I sit down at the table where crumbs of tart still scatter the linen, and I feel a relief so big and old-fashioned it almost aches. It is the sort of relief that needs a moment alone to recognize. Beth pours me a glass of water and hands me the sonogram back. Her hands are steady. "How are you?" she asks, not in the dramatic, theatrical way, but in the kind of way sisters do, the honest, practical question that refuses to be sentimental. "I'm okay," I say. "I'm steady." The word feels like a small, honest fact. In the days that follow, there is a flurry that is practical rather than spectacular. Lawyers call with the clinical efficiency of people who have seen 1,000 small dramas. Jenny texts me with the precise, calm updates that friends who do this work for a living develop. Firm confirmed filing, backup copies in place, we moved the originals. I read the messages in the small room where everything still smells faintly of rosemary and lemon. Brandon leaves town, first for a business trip that lasts too long, and then it seems for longer still. There are whispered explanations in family chat threads, time apart, processing, and an odd performative sadness from people who feel obliged to be seen caring. Nate posts nothing. Mrs. Hale calls once and says things that pretend to be gentle. I listen, and then place the phone aside. I do not answer when her voice tries to rearrange guilt into an obligation to forgive. Forgiveness is not mine to grant on someone else's schedule. The locks on our door are changed the next week. It is a small, private ritual. A locksmith, practical, efficient, replaces the mechanism while I stand in the kitchen and watch. My hand covers the box where I keep the original napkin copies and the small metal file. I transfer the keys to a drawer marked for emergencies, and then close it as if drawing a curtain. There are calls from friends, offers of casseroles and watchful help.
People come in practical ways. Beth brings soup and stays late to help me fold laundry while we talk about mundane things that feel like stitches. Jenny brings legal paperbacks with her elbows. She gives me information like someone who hands you a compass without the stern of a lighthouse. There's a social ripple. Some people who had been part of our orbit drift away, uncomfortable with the sides they are forced to take. It stings in small human ways, an invitation unextended, a message unanswered. But there are more who show up with no questions, with casseroles and cheeks lined with worry. Friendship cleans household dishes. Friendship makes the bed and reads the same book aloud until the words sound less lonely. A lawyer calls with the voice of someone who has been doing this for a long time and speaks in ways that are neither cruel nor hopeful. "We filed the documents you ask be filed first," she says. "There's a timeline. We'll keep you updated." The language is exact and steady. It is not a promise. It is preparation. That steadiness is what I wanted. There are logistical threats to pick up, a bank account to confirm, an insurance form to check, a few awkward conversations with in-laws that feel like walking on a floor that might give way. I let professionals guide the parts that need guiding. I do not step into the places where my emotions might make things messier than they need to be. There is dignity in that restraint. People who had thought they knew me better than anyone offer condolences and then apologies. Some of them are thin and brittle and unsatisfactory. Others are humble and true. I accept what I need and let the rest fall away like leaves. There is an art to sorting the useful from the sentimental. Pregnancy, when you are alone in the world in your body, is both a private miracle and a practical chore. I make appointments with a midwife whom I like because she speaks softly and names things plainly. She asks if I have people I can rely on. I say names, Beth, Jenny, and they become the scaffold of the months ahead. We talk about vitamins and kicks and the way a small human moves like a punctuation in a sentence you are writing. There is a strange, generous patience to preparing for a child when the other parent is becoming a rumor. The nursery is a small, tender rebellion. I thatched the crib with a blanket Beth's friend crocheted and hung a print I found at the market, a little fox in muted ink, watching the world with a calm you could build a life around. I paint the walls a soft color, not because I need pastel narratives, but because I found that making a space small and safe for someone else calms something ancient in me. I place the sonogram in a frame on the shelf next to a stack of children's books I have been collecting, one for each year I hope to read aloud. The act of arranging is its own enchantment. Nights become ritualized in small, tender ways. I light candles and fold laundry and make tea. I read aloud sometimes, voice low, the way people read the weather to their own hearts. Beth sleeps on the sofa on hard nights. Jenny arrives with takeout and the kind of counsel that is both blunt and humane. We laugh in between plans, spill things that must be said, and then remind each other to breathe. There is also a quiet domestic pleasure in reclaiming ordinary pleasures. I learn the exact temperature at which my oven will give me the perfect crust. I buy new sheets and sleep between them with a satisfaction that is not showy but solid. I take walks to the bookstore and slide my hand along the spines of books like someone reacquainting herself with friends. I keep a small ritual of lighting 3 candles in the evening and watching how the light shifts across the room. Those motions are stitches. There are practical emails from accountants and messages from people who mate bureaucracy with affection. I do not pretend these things are glamorous. They are small necessities that feel like an act of repair. The bedrock of the new life I am building is not built on spectacle, but on little, steady acts. When my son is born, when the small human makes the world slightly more crowded and immeasurably more tender, there is no dramatic scene at the hospital. There are soft faces, a measured midwife, Beth crying quietly in the corner, Jenny pacing and then sitting, finally still. I hold the infant against my chest and feel an odd, immediate clarity like a bell. Some things cannot be rehearsed, and some things do not require anyone's permission to be beautiful. People come to visit. They bring casseroles and tiny knitted booties. They hold the baby like a treasure and then hand him back without strings. There are no triumphant proclamations. There is a quiet sharing, a woven support that has nothing to do with the past and everything to do with the future. Brandon writes once, an email that attempts apology and negotiation in the same breath.
It is measured and defensive, and more about preserving his narrative than about seeking truth. I read it and fold it into a folder marked correspondence. I do not answer immediately. There is no satisfaction in quick retribution. There is satisfaction in a life that continues to be built despite the attempts to stage it otherwise. Nate's name slips from the circle of people we see. Mrs. Hale calls again, perhaps because it's easier to talk to someone than to listen to what has been done. She asks about the baby and about how I'm coping. I tell her, with a steadiness that has become a practice, that I am well. She says something about time and forgiveness, and then we both fall quiet. There is no formal reconciliation that week. Perhaps there never is. People rearrange themselves in ways you cannot always predict.
In the small domestic theater of my life, the baby's room becomes a place of daily rituals, a lullaby at dusk, the light falling a certain way across the mobile, the smell of lavender when I tuck him in. There is a delicious ordinariness to these acts. They anchor a life that had been unsteady. Friends continue to be the scaffolding. Beth texts me small updates, photos of a pie she made, silly pictures of our childhood dogs, little things meant to be a map of normalcy. Jenny sends long messages about other clients she's helped, little notes about bureaucratic things that people can pretend are boring, but that feel like a net. Their presence is not about taking me away from what happened. It's about helping me remain. There are moments, often in the smallest hours, when doubt moves through me like a breath. I hold the sleeping baby and think of the long trail of small decisions that brought me here. I am not immune from sorrow. There is a cost to what was taken, in ways that words cannot fully repair. But there is also a layered gratitude for the people who showed up and for the way this life, raw, messy, tender, unfolds. I go back to the file sometimes, not to pore over old wounds, but to remind myself of the work I did in the months before the reveal. I look at the labels Jenny helped me write and at the napkin copies that started the whole map. I do not find triumph in the paper. I find a ledger of agency. I had done small things that compounded into shelter. There is a day months later when I sit on the porch with my son in a sling and Beth beside me with a thermos of hot tea. The sun is soft. A neighbor's dog barks in the distance. I watch my child's minute hand curl and uncurl his fingers, and I feel an odd, deep anchoring. "You look like you're thinking of something heavy and delicious," Beth says. "Mostly delicious," I answer, and I mean it in a way that is not flippant. There is a weight to the aftermath that is manageable. Grief is present, but not crushing. Joy is present, but not unmoored. It is the work of building a life that is honest. Sometimes people ask what I hope the story gives them. They want a moral, a lesson, a map. If there is anything I would say, it is this. Small acts prepare you for large moments. Quiet, steady choosing is often more effective than a dramatic plea. Support matters. Documents matter in the way that facts and witnesses matter. But most of all, you are allowed to preserve your life with care and dignity. I do not think of what I gave them as retribution. I think of it as clarity. I gave them what they bet would unravel me and turned it into an instrument of truth. A signed paper returned, a folder of clear records, a sonogram folded into the center of their spectacle. They thought they had arranged a show. I handed them a record. At night, when the house is still and the baby sleeps like a small breathing island, I light 3 candles. The light moves across the room in a way that no one else notices but me. I watch the flame and think about the months of quiet, the friends who kept vigil, the decisions that were practical and gentle. I am not vengeful. I am not triumphant in the loud sense. I am steady. I am present. I have a small human who looks like me, garlic and salt, a friend who reads contracts like poetry, and neighbors who bring over casseroles without asking questions. I have a file box in a drawer that no one opens, and a heart that has been knit back through ordinary things. People sometimes expect the end of a story like this to be a banner of victory. Instead, mine is a table with crumbs on it, and a photograph in a frame, and a baby who yawns and finds his fist. The victory is quieter, mornings with tea that no one can schedule, nights of reading until the eyelids weigh down, The ritual of arranging a nursery and folding tiny clothes. That quiet life is the gift I gave myself. If you've watched this until the end, I'll say a small thing I mean. What I did was not grandiosity. It was preparation, patient and domestic. It was choosing steady steps over the glare of a spectacle. If one line of this story speaks to you, carry it with you in the small moments. Keep a friend who can look at a napkin and see more than a joke. Learn which people show up without applause. And remember that dignity is often built in the quiet. What was your favorite moment in this story? Tell me in the comments. What made you feel seen? If you'd like more stories about quiet strength and practical recovery, subscribe and join this small corner where we talk about rebuilding without dramatics. For now, I fold the baby close, the soft weight of him a small fact that rearranges the world in the kindest way. I look down at his face and feel a kind of prayer that is less about asking and more about noticing. In the slow, ordinary light of the living room, I realize something true and simple. I am enough, on my own terms, in my own quiet time.